Welcome, Jay. It is a pleasure and honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
To begin, the first thing you had written in regards to topics for this interview was mindfulness. Why is this important to you? And how has this practice changed the way you live your life?
It is really something sort of newish to my realm of awareness of what that actually is within the last 5 years, anyways. But I know from growing up in my younger years that my life was sort of a struggle in a lot of ways. And the struggle mostly was due to the way that I perceived my environment to be versus myself and the environment, and there was things that I liked or disliked about the environment that I was in, and if I didn't like it, let's say I would go into basically fight or flight mode, or having some anger or fear resistance to the moment. And after enough years of basically kind of struggling with my likes or dislike about the present moment, I read some books and learned a little bit about mindfulness, and learned that the continuation of my thought process is not necessarily always leading me to the next thing, per se. That the way that I view my current state of affairs is sort of colored by my perceptions of whether it's a good or bad thing. So what that means as far as mindfulness goes, when I learned to basically pay attention to my thoughts and feelings from the observer standpoint, I was able to realize that the way that I color the experience right now isn't always necessary. Like, I can just value this moment for exactly what it is without my whole story going into the moment as well. That's what I have with mindfulness.
How has the material world affected our connection with our intuition and our spirit? How can we tell when our spirit is speaking through us? And how can we identify our intuition to make decisions that favor our well being?
Mm. Very, very good question. Intuition, it's a really tough thing to kind of pinpoint intuition, what that is in this material world, spiritual world. I feel like intuition is of itself a spiritual nature. It's what's there once all of the other noise is removed of life. It's the thing inside of you that creates a spark that says, hey, here's something, kind of like a spidey sense. It's the information of the universe, I think, that is giving us some clues as to what's going on, even though we may be blinded ourselves some ways to see through clearly to the intuition itself.
I do wonder, it's kind of like it's kind of like when we're asked to guess the color of like a certain rock underneath a cup or something. How can we tell when we are doubting ourselves? And then yeah, how can we tell intuition from when we're doubting ourselves? Where does that what do you usually feel when you feel the fear of doubt coming inside of you? How do you work on that to ensure that you believe in your intuition and you work on it so it's strong enough to where you automatically go straight to your intuition instead of straight to doubt? That might be a
Yeah,
long-winded question, but
really, really good question. I feel like intuition and doubt are basically kind of polar opposites of the same thing. They sort of feel the same within our psyche, whether when I have an intuitive thought, when something kind of sparks my imagination, it has the same similar sort of feeling to doubt, like or when a fear comes in initially, you kind of have this energetic sort of feeling, I feel like, with both. So how do you tell the difference between intuition and doubt? What do you really listen to, right? And for me, when it comes to doubt, anyways, intuition's a little bit tougher to pin down for me, but I think when it comes to doubt, I can sort of uncover the past that would bring me to this feeling of doubt, because it's usually a fear of something that I think might happen as a result of my choices, say, in this moment. And that could be based on things that I've experienced prior in my life, which could have, a chance that these things could happen again, but maybe not, but that doubt is there, and it can kind of freeze people up. And that's what kind of makes people have that stuck sort of feeling, like they just cannot move on. And intuition, I mean, so if you track the whole story all the way through, you can kind of see the seed of doubt from way back, if enough kind of practice and inner searching for that. With intuition, I do think it's similar, but I feel like it's harder to uncover that seed that brought the information to place. Whereas that's where I kind of feel like intuition is more of the spiritual realm than doubt. Instant information that's just there that we kind of can tune into, I think, resonant, a feeling of resonance with that idea.
And I think I heard a car in the background confirm what you're saying. I noticed the I noticed your tattoo that has the yin and yang.
Oh,
May
yes.
I,
Yeah. Thank you.
may I ask you about your personal perspective, opinion, or background experience with the spiritual realm? Like, how do you view spirituality? And then even, do you see a difference between spirituality and consciousness?
I'll start with my background in spirituality, of which there wasn't much. I was brought up by a family who did sort of like Catholic things, but not, it wasn't really like a practiced thing. It wasn't like, it was sort of like, yeah, we go to church, but that's where it left. There was no like deeper meaning to be found in this stuff. I think in terms of my family when I was growing up, it's just something that you did. You just went to church. So I didn't have much of a faith built in at a young age in a creator idea or God or anything like that. I kind of didn't quite buy it. It seemed like an adult game, like a thing that everybody knew was just kind of made up, but they just played along with it anyways, is kind of how I felt about it. So I sort of rejected at that age all sorts of spirituality because of it just seemed like made up stuff to me. And so with that, I think most of my life I was pretty agnostic. Like I didn't know what there was or what there wasn't, but I didn't see any evidence of anything, and I didn't really do much seeking in that regard at all until later in life. Like I said, about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, maybe, where I started to question not necessarily the spiritual nature, but the nature of one's self, life and death and what goes on within that time and then afterwards, and how do we get here, and what is consciousness, what is existence, what is life, and all these sort of questions started coming up because things on face value from what we can see, touch, taste, and experience in this world aren't always exactly true as they seem. And I think that's the sort of the same thing with the spiritual nature of things, because we can't see, taste, touch, smell the spiritual nature necessarily. So it's something that it's got to be like found from within. It's another part of our existence.
Yeah, so how has this spiritual realm interacted with you? I would say interacted with you in your life. And then, do you see a difference between spirituality and consciousness?
You know, I feel like these are difficult questions to really, but they're thoughtful. I enjoy this.
Oh, I don't have a
Spiritual.
definite answer either.
Yeah, it's very vague. Consciousness, I feel like is just simple awareness. If I take consciousness and I try to envision what that is inside of me, you can't pinpoint a place in the body that consciousness arises from. Typically we think it's like in the brain or, somewhere around the eyes area, because I think we get a lot of input in that way. And the brain does process information, but other parts of our bodies act like a brain too. Our heart has a lot of, functions that operate in a brain-like capacity. And there's other areas too with chakras and things like that that are not necessarily physical in the body, but they're representative of the energies that we encompass. So consciousness is, I feel like, just the bare bones awareness of the inputs that we are able to receive in our bodily form. And spirituality, I feel like, is the coming to the truth of that, or the discernment of what's real and what's not real, sort of. Whether that's a specific type of religion that you might be into, or for me, the spiritual journey is to look at through myself and see what's true and what's not true in the ways that I think and feel and interact with the people in my environment, with animals, with the earth, Mother Earth is herself, to coexist and to cohabitate with all of that, because I feel like it's all me, and the understanding spiritually that I'm no different than you, the listener, or you, Victoria, or the printer that's here on the desk next to me. It's all the same stuff. It all has spirituality, and it all, I feel like, has some form of conscious awareness as it's able to in the form that it's in. Right.
That's a great answer. Yeah. Awesome.
That's
Well,
how I view it.
yeah, from my perspective, it's a great answer. Have you come across synchronicities in your life that have assured you that spirituality is meant to be part of your life, meant to be part of how you perceive the world?
Synchronicities are very interesting. They occur all the time. It's like everybody has heard of 1111. The number's 1111. You see Make a Wish, it's 1111, and it's funny, but it's like almost every time I look at a clock, I'm looking at 1111, and it's interesting. It's like a synchronicitous kind of a thing. What does that mean? I don't know if it means quite anything, but it's something that I'm attentive to and I have an awareness on. And the repetitive nature of that, just seeing that, gives that kind of some significance. What it is, I don't really know, but synchronicities are interesting. Yeah. There's other things though that make me really that have happened that are not necessarily, it's like I have a housemate here who is also into spirituality and energetic work and things like that. And we have a good connection. We've been friends for 27 years or something like that. And she, would talk to me about this or that, and then we wouldn't talk for some days, right? But I'd be like, say I'd be out on a bike ride maybe, and I'd get this like feeling, and I'd start having like images about this certain person running through my thoughts, or I could, there was like there'd be like a conversation going on. I would get a general kind of a feeling about something is very specific to, like, say, this one specific person, right? And then I would have a conversation with my friend some days later, and she would say, "Oh, the other, Wednesday, I was da 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 in the middle of the day, and this and this happened with this specific person that just popped into my field of consciousness at that time, like the same day, the same moment, and this has happened more times than it just happens all the time. It's more like expected, like if she's going through some sort of an emotional period, or has a certain, some sort of emotional period, or something specific happens, there is a distance connection there where I'll get kind of tuned into what's going on in that environment. Very interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, I haven't, I'm very new and recent to feeling energies like this. And it's only been within the first few months that I actually started to be able to tap in. I don't know if it's tap in, but feel someone else's energy, kind of in awareness. In awareness here, definitely. In awareness here, almost like sometimes that person, it seems like that person is viewing through my eyes.
Mm.
Yeah, it became very, it was just like, whoa, are you peeping into my life? But there's the vice versa. So it does feel like it's a next level of consciousness. I've never felt like that at all in my whole life. In my whole life, I've never, or I just doubted my intuition so much that I just thought that I was making it up in my head when I was feeling maybe other people who are, doing certain things or talking about me, or like it's like yeah. So in the past, I was so disconnected, not knowing my intuition where I couldn't feel it, but now being more mindful actually puts me in the spiritual realm and in the conscious realm, being able to actually feel energies now. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of that has to do with, when you're practicing mindfulness and present state in the moment, uh, you're, I apologize for the sirens and everything going by here. Normally, like say before I, quote unquote woke, before I woke up, before I had any semblance of spirituality or anything like that, my thoughts were just running on autopilot, and I would just listen to everything that came across in my brain and felt, and I would react, be very very reactionary to my own feelings, to my fears, to my judgments of myself or others, to the situation, whether I like it or dislike it. It was always some kind of a story going on. There was always some kind of activity, and I was never able to just quiet the mind to be able to tune into things like that. And I think when you're on a spiritual path and you're practicing mindfulness and aware of your thoughts and feelings and actions and things on a regular moment to moment basis, then you are quiet enough to be able to listen and tune in to these other energies that we normally wouldn't experience, because I didn't experience anything like that in my whole life until I sort of learned to quiet the mind and body through practices like meditation and just general mindfulness practice.
What does your daily life look like? Do you have any repetitive things you do, like meditation, things that you need to, or you feel you need to do consistently every day in order to maintain mindfulness?
Meditation is very helpful and it's a good practice. I don't meditate every day. I do maybe 3 or 4 days a week. I will meditate because I enjoy it. But I feel like meditation, if it's used to get some sort of a benefit, or if I feel like I'm all out of sorts, so I need to meditate and get at peace and centered, and I'm using it as a transactional sort of a thing, like I'm trying to get something from meditation for me, then it's not, that's it's not really what it's all about. It's more of a practice in order to work into daily living, so meditation for me is mostly throughout the day as I'm walking or eating lunch in a restaurant or at work, especially because I have a pretty repetitive job at work. And I work in a factory, so I'll make 100, 200, sometimes 300 of the same parts throughout the day. And then so in 8 hours it's like one piece every 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm always kind of shuffling my hands around doing something to get these things done, but it's not really like entertaining. There's not a whole lot there to keep me like occupied. So a lot of times you can get lost and run on thoughts and all these things, like you got some music going on too, but that's the time where I really try to just focus on, my breath. I'll tune into my body. I'll tune into the actions that I'm making, the movements of my hands. I'll, pay attention to the things that I'm looking at and just really focus in on the moment. And it really just helps to make that experience something instead of something I'd rather not be doing. So I use my work as a practice a lot, but I do find meditation really helpful too. I enjoy it.
It's I I wanted to mention a video that I kind of got hypnotized into on TikTok. It reminds me of uh of making bricks. So it's this um person. I don't remember the foreign country, but he's just on TikTok live and all he's doing is just
Oh
making
yeah,
bricks. Oh yeah, you know the
I've
same
I've I've
one.
yeah, I've seen. There's a couple different guys that I see post things like that, and it's really neat. They're crouched down on the ground. They have a mold, and then they'll just plop some dirt on it and then bring it outside and place it on the ground. And that is basically what I do, except we use hydraulic press machines that crush it down into the shape, but same idea.
And it's funny because I don't think I knew your job before I ran into the video, but I found myself staying there and just watching for a while and realizing how you could be meditating by doing something like that in a repetitive pattern. This would be cool if you yeah, I don't know what you think about frequencies, but like especially making things with your hands, you're you're kind of putting your imprint, your creator imprint on the brick as you're working with it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, because across the street from where I work, there was all these other big factory buildings that were once owned by my company, but they sold that off to the city, who is now developing a manufacturing park there for like green energy businesses and things like that, which will be nice. But you look at all the buildings that were there, and then they tumbled them all down, crushed them into little tiny rocks. Those little tiny rocks got crushed into little gravel, and then it'll eventually be sand, and eventually that could work back into the mix
Mm.
that we use to make the bricks that are going to, it's the story kind of goes back far and far and far. So my part in making the brick is definitely has my energetic imprint on it, but it's also got the imprint of the sun itself. So it's interesting, the perspective when you can diagnose that and look at it. It's really neat how everything is just another form of the same thing eventually.
That's a good point. I'll cut off this part. I guess sometimes I'm just like, ooh, oh, that was a good point. Awesome. How can people view their addictions in a way that would help reestablish their sense of personal sovereignty? And if you are comfortable sharing, when have you struggled with addiction and how did you overcome the tendency to quote unquote escape or quote unquote dilute the issue?
Yeah, this I'll go very personal with this, because I think it's important, because people do struggle with this. A lot of people have many addictions, and they're not always in the form of drugs or alcohol or things like that. There's just so many ways that we sort of cope with society that are not healthy for us or others in the long run. That's kind of what addiction is. It's like a quick hit of a release, dopamine release, serotonin, what have you, but eventually it will fall. I think it was brought on. I was assaulted as a child, so I'm sorry if that triggers anybody, but it was something that brought about in me a disconnection with the world and myself, because I felt like I was not safe, uh, and the world was a dangerous place at that point in my youth. So when I found alcohol when I was young, that released me from that feeling of like there's got to be something wrong with me. Well, all the things that we would say to ourselves in that situation, like, I'm just unlucky or whatever it is. We sort of take the blame on ourselves for whatever traumas that we experience, especially when you're young and don't know how to handle stuff like that. So I was introduced to alcohol. It took all away that crummy feeling, and I really just didn't have to feel that at that moment, and I like that resonated with me, just to be able to have like sort of an off switch to feeling the feelings that I had of less than or not valuable as others or whatever the case might be. And that progressed over time, where that was like the rabbit in the hat, like that was the trick that I knew would work, and I used it into my teen years, early 20s, and let that kind of my life was dictated by these addictions. Of course, there's a lot of suffering that goes along with that. The people around you suffer because they see that you have potential to be more, useful to yourself and society, to be more loving to yourself and society, to be, to do something other than to waste one's life away on whatever addictions that they're on. And so for me, it was like I had to believe in myself enough to get over that. And so the bridge to that was spirituality. It was the moment that I realized that I am not my thoughts, was life changing, because I'm like, well, if I'm not, well, whose thoughts are these then? And then I learned about the observer aspect of things. Like I'm not the one who's I'm the one who's thinking the thoughts, right? But when the thoughts come, who's listening? And I'm like, well, if these thoughts just come and go and I don't have to listen necessarily, then they can just come and go, and they don't necessarily need to affect my life. So like I learned that I can distance myself from all of those feelings that I had about myself and give myself a little bit of a break. And that allowed me to have the want to see myself do better, um, because I could see that the one who was pinning myself down this whole time was my own self. It was my own belief and my own thoughts about myself, about the situation, about the way the world is, my own perceptions and beliefs. And that if I looked at things through a different lens, through a different perspective, through a clearer, mindful lens, that I don't need to be relieved of the suffering that I was causing myself anymore. And that's when I was able to let go of those addictions. So they were my cross to bear, but also my greatest source of freedom.
I want to put that on a shirt one day.
Mhm.
Put your name on it. I might just make quotes of, honestly, I was thinking about it. I was thinking of just having quotes of people from the podcast and putting it on shirts.
Like that idea.
Do you often find yourself revisiting versions of you from the past, and then you're like connecting that energy of yours with the present version?
Mm-hmm.
Do you find
Oh
yourself?
yeah, yeah, and I think that's very important to go through and just, like here, I'll show you. Okay, now I can see. It's my little window temple. You can see there's Shiva back there. I don't know if you can see Shiva. There's Buddha, a couple other things there. But I also, before it was raining, I usually keep this little picture of this is little me as a baby, because I'm no longer that person. That person came from that person, but that's no longer me. So little Jay, I go back a lot, and I'll revisit times where he's feeling sad and depressed, and looking back into places in my life, and there'll be times that come up where an event that happened that sort of shaped my view on things, of the world and people and things like that. I was just a very hurt person back then. And I go back to those times of hurt and I sort of give my younger self like a hug, for going through all of that stuff, for feeling all the pain, for doing all the dirty work that led up to eventually the catharsism that brought about the freedom that I feel these days. To feel the just the love and just the contentment and security that I do feel these days. But younger Jay, I really appreciate every everything that he did. So I often connect with my younger versions of myself, um, especially if it's something I like or don't like about myself, because those are all things that need to be loved and appreciated, things that we like or don't like. And
And
so
those are the
yeah,
hardest things. Those are the hardest things to find love when, yeah, it could be.
we can beat ourselves up a lot. I think people have a tendency to do that, look back on times in their life where they wish they had done things differently or, made some mistakes or something like that. But, mistakes are there to learn from. So, and no matter what, we always do the best things that we can for ourselves with the information that we have at our disposal at the time. It's not like we're ever deliberately trying to mess our lives up or whatever. So it's important to love and understand the decisions that were made because they were made for good reasons.
About how long did it take you to release the addiction of alcohol and perhaps other things in your life, and then come to your own established self acceptance, perhaps
Uh,
losing codependency as well on the external environment?
yeah, that took a very long time. The length of life that I struggled with addictions was quite. It was into my 40s, and honestly, it brought me to some pretty low place. I almost died a few times as a result of the addictions. Very close to death. But you know what? What brought me out of the addictive part of it was the understanding that I'm trying to cure something with alcohol or drugs or whatever, gambling, whatever you want. Trying to fix a situation that I think is a problem. Whatever the problem is I'm sad, say, or whatever I think the problem is, I'm trying to fix it with this substance. And I had to realize that what I didn't need to fix was my relationship with the substance. I had to work on the relationship with myself. That was where the issue really was, and that's once I saw the truth in that, then I was able to process the things that were going on. And then once that was done, then addiction doesn't have a hold anymore. Like there's nothing pushing me toward that anymore because the root cause has been addressed. Yeah, I think that's really what did it. That was about 7 or 8 years ago now that I've been free
Wow.
from that aspect of trying to cope with life using anything really. These days, it could even be coffee. Like I enjoy having a cup of coffee. I'll have one cup in the morning and that's it. But sometimes throughout the day, I might feel a little anxious or uneasy or something, and I fidgety, want to do something, and I think, oh, I should go make myself a coffee, but I'm using that to. And it's the same kind of a thing. It's
Mhm.
much lower, damage risk, but at the same time, it's not needed. So I'm just observant of that these days.
Yeah. Side question: have you ever tried cacao to replace coffee, or like have you tried to replace coffee with other things?
I haven't. No, I have not.
Okay.
No.
I still take coffee every now and then. But yeah, I used to be super addicted.
I've heard mud water is pretty good. There's other
Mm,
other good ones out there.
haven't heard of that. but I'll look it up after this.
Yeah, I think it's like a mushroom cacao blend, if I'm not mistaken. So it'll have some reishi, lion's mane, things like that in there.
Oh yeah, I actually have heard of it. Okay. How can people gently face their trauma in a way that would help them recognize the severity of their trauma while also releasing themselves from quote unquote victimhood or quote unquote victim mentality?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when it comes to traumatic experiences, it's a deeply personal thing with that because when you're faced with a trauma that you can call a traumatic experience like that, is something that may have similarly happened to somebody else, but nobody else had it happen quite like it happened to you. Nobody else is able to feel quite like you do about the situation that happened. So come to terms with the trauma as not something that is personal because it's something that happened to you without you didn't request this, whatever happened. It's just something that sort of happened and you got shook. It's important to come to terms with that, but in your own time and in your own way. And it's a difficult thing for me. It took all of the 40 something years of my life to work through it. Like it literally did. I had to go out and fail and fall on my face and break down and cry and be depressed and be anxious and struggle and fail and disappoint people, disappoint myself. I had to go through all of these things for so many years in order to realize that I'm just reliving this trauma from when I was 7, 8, 9 years old over and over and over again in the background of my mind. And that was fueling the way that my life was shaping out to be, because I had my attention on that. And so when it comes to trauma, it's important to not identify with it. But again, that's the personal journey with it, is understanding that it's not you because of you that this thing happened. It's just something, it just happened, and it's an experience, but it's not necessary to identify with that experience and say, for the rest of my life, I'm a trauma victim, and like sort of label myself, or even like the 12 steps of Alcoholic Anonymous, which I've gone through with before. Like, I understand it's important to recognize that you have a problem, but everybody in the meetings is like, hey, my name is Jason, I'm an alcoholic. And every day you're reaffirming that you are this alcoholic, or you are a drug addict, or you are a gambler, or whatever, however you want to, whatever the case might be. I think it's important to not identify with that trauma, to be able to create some space so that you can learn that it's just something that happened, and it's just not a personal thing that happened to you because of you or anything like that.
What you're saying in regards to that reminds me of the power behind our words. It's like our affirmations. If we keep on saying, I'm an alcoholic, we're we're affirming that every single day, every single time, we go to Alcohol Anonymous.
Right. Yeah, that solidifies it, doesn't it? I mean, you repeat it over and over and over again, eventually that becomes your identity, and then your decisions are based off of that. So like, I am an alcoholic, so I can't go to restaurants where other people are drinking, say, because then I might be tempted to have a drink. These all these things which just aren't true. It's just not true. Like, you could be tempted, yes, but it's not that you're an alcoholic so much as you have had a history of using alcohol to cope, or to not have to think or feel, or whatever the case is. But I think the term alcoholic or drug addict or things like that is very temporary. It's not a lifelong thing.
It kind of sounds like the person saying those things, it definitely it definitely looks like self-limitation because and lack of self-control. And I want to say this in a very gentle and compassionate way because uh, I also I also have struggled with addiction and still do to a certain extent. But it also does feel like the temptation is kind of projected externally instead of something that we can actually control within ourselves, which is what you were talking about earlier, is looking within yourself to see how you can change.
Yeah, yeah, that's the spiritual journey right there. To I think to be able to reflect on oneself honestly, not with any judgment or anything like that, but to look at things and discern whether it's something useful for general life or not, and with that, it was like my depression, my sadness, my anxieties, my fears, my all of the stuff that drove me to use or drink or whatever. Like all of that stuff was my own battle within myself. All of that stuff had nothing to do with the alcohol. So the spiritual journey for me was to find peace with those things, or to at least learn to accept the things. Like that's a good one from the 12-step programs, is to accept the things that you cannot control. And that's important. Change what you can, accept what you can't. And so that's what I did. I accepted that my life transpired in such a way for the first 40 some odd years. Cannot change that. But I can, right now in this moment, choose to use that information for what it is to help me have a better life, not to keep me stagnant, to keep me in this frame of mind that there's the victim mentality or something like that, or that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. Because right now in this moment, that's not true. I'm just sitting here in a room talking to a computer screen and having a good conversation, but there is nothing else going on. There's all the story that preceded me before this doesn't necessarily matter right now. And, and that's, I think, what frees you.
What does it mean in this day and age to awaken? How does this differ, or perhaps have similarities as well, from the woke culture? And when does a person know that they are awakening? So, yeah, we can start with what does it mean in this day and age to awaken? And then the similarities and differences to awakening with woke culture.
Yeah, woke culture is something I'm not too sure. I see that there's people that I work with who would consider themselves conservatives, and sometimes I'll ride with them here and there. We'll be going to some place. These are great people too. Um, but for some, that they'll listen to like the conservative talk radio. It's very inflammatory, very, it's just something else. And they talk about this woke culture, and I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that, the war on woke and stuff like that. Because for me, awakening is just when you've been under the illusion that things are the way that they are for a long time, and then all of a sudden you're presented with new evidence that shows that the way you've thought about things previous to right now is not really true, that there's a different aspect, or things aren't quite what they used to be before. And that's awakening. That's when you're enlightened with new information that you're able to use to, now you're conducting in reality a little bit more than you were before, right? Whereas before I was operating on somewhat of an illusion. So for me, awakening was realizing that me and my world are not separate. You know, that was the grand awakening. That's something that I didn't think before. I thought I was very much separate from everybody else and everything. Just like I felt like everybody else was separate from everybody else and everything. Like we are just all individual kind of souls in that respect. And I think awakening was when I realized that we're all connected. You know, we're all connected in more ways and just physically or materially or spiritually or energetically or whatever. We're connected in every way that could be possible in the universe. It's all one, and that is where I feel like the awakening continues throughout for me in my time, because that's something when I woke up from that illusion that I'm separate, was it's hard to break free of that. And I still find myself, with my own personal wants and my needs, um and that's the beauty of it, though, because I see the other side, and I see when these wants and needs come up and they're a little bit self-based, that I can kind of laugh a little bit and say, okay, there's that ego, there's the ego. That's kind of the stuff that shows me that I can let go of a little bit more, because most things are just habitual in the ways that we act and operate and everything. But so I think waking up is just the having the want to take a look at the illusions, that things could possibly be illusions, that I might not be seeing things properly, or realistically or holistically, or however you want to put it.
When does a person know that they are awakening? Are there telltale signs, or is there anything in your personal life that kind of really caught you and ensured that you investigated to find out what the truth was in anything?
Yeah, I don't know about anybody else. I can only speak from my own experience. And the my awakening, it wasn't a very sudden thing. It was very slow over many years. There'd be little glimpses that would pop up, and then I'd forget them almost immediately after they popped up. But then looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that thing happened. That showed me that things could be a little bit different. But then I just got wrapped up in my bullshit again, right? But these days, I think somebody knows, when you just will know. There'll be a shift in the way that you view things. And for me, it was brought on through a relationship that soured pretty bad. It became quite angry and violent, with my ex there. Not on my part. I wasn't angry or violent with her, but she was. She was had some mental health stuff that she was dealing with, and anyways, it was difficult to go through that because I loved her, and it was untenable to continue the relationship after a while, and I was tore up, and I was like at the end of my rope, broken. And that's when I sort of awoke. Um, that's when the awakening happened for me. That I knew that I read a couple of books and started looking into things about mindfulness and stuff. I'm like, hey, I'm not my thoughts. And that really was just the big thing. That was the biggest change in my life. That all the things that I think and feel and stuff are not necessarily me. They're just bodily things that happen. So, and um, I can choose to accept all of that and move on with my life with it, or I can try to fight it and push it all away and struggle and try to do all of that stuff, which I'd already spent my whole life doing, and I'd rather not. So now I just accept everything, and that's just freedom right there. That's all I ever wanted in life. I just wanted to feel okay. Like if I just feel okay, that's all I really want. And it turns out it's not through a substance that I get that; it's through acceptance.
What do you feel like the world needs to hear right now?
It's funny, the world. What does the world need to hear? It's interesting. Everybody that's here right now will not be here in 120 years. So the world will totally flip over. But what the population right now might need to hear is just that everything is okay. Even the things that disgust us about society, even people that do malicious things, people that are self serving, deceitful, dishonorable, all these societal ills that we see. I think people need to know that it's okay that all that stuff happens, that it's perfect that it is happening, actually. Because much like my own struggles in my own personal life brought me to freedom through the experience of going through them struggles, I think the struggles that we feel as a society, we've got to go through this in order to evolve our mindset about each other and about our relationship with the planet, animals, and other things like that too, with each other. That eventually everything is going to be okay. No, and no matter what. At the end of the day, it's all love. And I know this. I've been through some, not only just through psychedelic journeys through it, but I have experienced that where it was, there was a general understanding as well as a voice that said everything is going to be okay. There's nothing to worry about. That it's all fine. That's what the universe told me, and that's what I think everybody needs to hear.
How can we put love into our daily lives? And do you believe that it has a ripple effect in our external reality?
Yes. Short answer with that is yes. I do believe it has a ripple effect to put more love into life, to put more love into our general experience with everybody. I think it just, well, for me, it comes down to just attention to the matter of the fact that I'm no different. Um, at the core of it all, you know, even just on the physics scientific terms of the whole thing, when you look back, as far as we can tell, looking back through time, which we do by looking back through space, that it appears that everything happened from a singular point, and or everything sort of came from one thing, big bang, whatever you want to call it. Creation could be, that doesn't even matter what you call the thing, but it all started from one point, and from that one point, that's where we all are. um Still, it's just gotten bigger, but it's one point, it's just gotten bigger. So love is the understanding that, yeah, although there may be differences in our little, lives, and this one looks different and that one is shorter, this one's a woman, that one's a man, all the differences that we perceive in here is really just like another shade of color. It's like we can have 1,000 different shades of green, and that's just what kind of we all are. It's just a tiniest little shade of consciousness that's different than somebody else's consciousness, that's different than somebody else's, but it's all the same awareness at the end of the day. So when you understand that, or understand, I like that better, that where there is no difference between me and you. And even physically, even though we're a great distance, we're in different countries, you and I speaking right now, my body's here and your body's there, you could say that, but really, where's the line between us? Like, where does my body end and yours begin? And it's like, well, you can see my skin, that could be an endpoint, right? Yeah, well, could be. But then there's also the heat signature coming off my skin. Is that not still my body, or does it start, where does the heat signature not become my body? Where does my electromagnetic signature end? Where does the vision spectrum feeling that I get from within and back and forth, where does that end? And there's no real definitive point where you can cut the slice of bread and say, this is you and this is me. There really isn't. That doesn't mean we're the same, but it means we're of the same, and I feel like with that put first in life, it's hard to harm anybody else, because you want to do others, plants, animals, and environment as well as you would for yourself. You end up kind of living the golden rule by default, because you want others to feel love, happiness, and enjoyment. because that's you too. And who's to say that we don't experience each other's lifetimes at some point? You know, like that could be possible. I don't know. In my experience, I only know my experience as Jay, but I could live your life at some other time, place, and we, who knows? Who really knows? But I feel like love, at the end of the day, is what we all respond to the most. It's maternal, paternal. Um, I think that's at the end of the day, love is the greatest energy. And the universe just wants to know itself and it wants to love itself. And that's what we're here to do, is to have the awareness and the experience of life in order for the universe to do that.
Is it okay if I ask you a couple more questions?
Sure, sure, far away.
How can we find oneness in polarity? Because you have the yin yang.
Polarity is interesting because it's two sides of the same thing. It always is. So that's another thing, that even though there's black, white, or in this case black and yellow, they're the same thing, which is going right along the lines of what we were just talking about. The polarity of it, dark light. Dark light is only, you're showing the two sides of the visual spectrum. Hot, cold, you're showing the two sides of the temperature spectrum, but it's all part of the same thing. So when it comes to polarities, for me, I view polarities as just part of the spectrum. It's just the one end of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum. But
I think what I could have added on to that question was in regards to this world and the polarity that we see, maybe in like politics, religion, men versus women, white versus black, all the polarity we're seeing right now in the world. And I know it's dependent on each person's life because, yeah, I know I do understand that topics come to us regarding internal things that we're meant to work on. I meant to add on in regards to the world.
okay, yeah, yeah. There's so much of it going on right now, isn't there? There's the political polarities here in the United States. Of course, there's the conservative and liberal, which is the same as many other countries in the world, basically the same two-party system. All the wars that are happening out there, the disagreements that people have with each other. Now, these days is so polarized that it's in the general consensus with people in the media is just put it out there and say something, and it doesn't matter if it's true or not. At least you're kind of stoking the flames in that regard. Like, I think polarity is kind of the point of politics. That's part of the whole thing, though, is in coming to the understanding of unity of all of us, and all of this thing is, unfortunately, we've got to experience the other side of that, and that's the division, to fully see the unity of it. And I think this is something that helps open our eyes to these things, because when I was a younger boy, back in the 80s, there was a lot of patriotic nationalism about the United States. There was the 86 Olympics with Mary Lou Retton, and Americans beat USSR in the hockey and stuff like that. There was a whole lot of stuff, and it was like rah rah go America, and and everything, with that. And it seemed like good, like the right thing to do, like to root for your country, like you're rooting for your homeschool football team, but at the end of the day, like, that's very divisive. Just, I'm not saying you can't love the land that you live on, but to be like rah rah, America is so great and all you other countries are no good, or you're not even close to as good as us, or whatever, however you want to put it, is divisive. That's polarity right there, because we're trying to divide little sectors of the planet and say this one is better than that one because we're good and you're not, and all this other stuff. But I think we've got to be able to see the full breadth of polarity in order to find the unity. I think people are opening their eyes to that the more that these politics are out there in the open. You can kind of see where we're being pulled one way or the other, or they want you to think this, and propaganda here and there and everywhere. And it's going to, help us come to an understanding that we have our own, minds to use and not get so involved in that divisive kind of atmosphere. For me, it's tough. My heart goes out because I want everybody to be peaceful and I want the world to be loving and accepting for everybody. Everybody should feel safe, have a home, have food to eat. That shouldn't be a thing that we're still grappling with. But here we are, and I've got to accept that. And my acceptance of that is just saying that, hey, there's enough of that out here. Let's just expand love. Like, how can I bring more love into this moment, into this conversation? And, how can I cause less harm in my general surroundings? I'm not going to be honking my horn at people. If they cut me off, I might get upset real quick, but I'll smile and wave, like take the bigger road, take the high road or however you want to put it, just cause less strife in the world. I think just doing a little bit of that each day just helps, helps for others to feel the love. And I think people need more of that. People need to feel more love from others, like instead of having disagreements. And if you don't like what I do ideologically, then we can't be friends, all that stuff. Like there just needs to be more general love. And Jesus kind of he was onto a lot of good stuff back in his day. Yeshua.
What are you looking forward to with yourself? It could be within the next year, some goals you have for yourself. Yeah. I don't know if you use the word hope. Yeah, what are you hoping for investing in yourself for the future?
Sure. The next year, well, I've in a new city, well, we're returning to a state that I used to live in. So I've been here in this new city now for a year. So I've got myself employed here, but I really am hopeful to get more involvement in the community. There is a yoga studio that I'm going to join to start doing some exercising with yoga practice. Like to have some more outreach here locally with the homeless community. I've so I'm saving some money. I'm going to put together like some bags of things that they could use out here locally. Maybe some fun stuff too. That's not even stuff that they necessarily would need, like toothbrush, toothpaste type stuff. There may be some fun stuff too that people would just like to have in their lives. But if I can, that's one way I can interject a little bit more love, show some compassion out here, and get more just involved in the community because I just don't know a lot of people out here, and I would like to. I feel like I have something to offer the community. The community has something to offer me as well, and like I just want to get more involved in this next year. That's what I'm looking forward to.
This sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a wonderful conversation. I'm really,
Thanks.
I'm really grateful that you decided to have an interview with me. Yeah, we covered some amazing topics.
Yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me here. I enjoy seeing your videos on the internet as well as some of the guests that you had on the podcast. So I'm really happy to be just part of this community and happy to, answer any questions that you had for me. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jay. It was awesome. It was awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I hope you have a
Yeah,
wonderful rest of your day.
I do. I will. You too, Victoria. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, talk soon with you, Jay.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Goodbye.